Once a pre-K teacher created a little interesting activity for her kids to keep them engaged. She wrote a song about popcorn, would have the kids crouch down on the floor, and at various times, the kids, like popcorn, would pop up. Loved it. One day, the popcorn song was in full sway, and kids were popping up everywhere, except for one little 4-year-old who just remained crouching on the ground. And she said, "What's the matter? Why aren't you popping like the rest of the boys and girls?" Looking up and sounding much older than his 4 years of age, he said, "I'm burning on the bottom of the pan." Yeah. We all have times like that, right? Times of the ordinary frustrations and struggles of daily living. Then sometimes we experience a tragedy or loss whose pain seems almost unbearable. We wonder how we would go on, or maybe if we even wanted to. And we long for those days when it seemed like all we were doing was merely burning on the bottom of the pan. Suffering is all around us, really. Sometimes we don't notice it as much. My gosh, just the other day I talked to a young family from our parish whose child, if that child lives to birth, will die shortly after, and to initiate plans for funeral. Last night I left a message, didn't catch her live, but to a young woman whose husband died by suicide, leaving behind kids age 12 all the way down to just under 2. And I could go on. It's really, there's great suffering all around us. At some point or another, it visits us all. And questions for people of faith include, what do we do with our pain? How are we changed by what we suffer? Well, what about you? What does your suffering tend to do to you? Today we hear a bit of the story of Job, who was visited by one horrific tragedy after another. And you hear that today he's pretty much had it. His question to begin, is all of life a drudgery? There are plenty of people who hear that question and would answer, yes. Some folks have kind of become convinced that life is inherently awful. They get mad at the world, and some become bitter, angry people. Yet there are those who somehow, even though their lives have found a way to incorporate that they're able to walk through this world in the midst of all of that with a certain level of peace, even joy sometimes, with a deep wisdom. Most of us know people like that who have suffered greatly, still they somehow keep going on and doing what they can to make it a better world. Or, at the end of Job, the part we don't hear, today he asks, is not all of life a drudgery? And he seems to feel like it is, but by the end, he gives this beautiful proclamation of the goodness of God. How did he do that? Or think of Jesus. Today we again see him helping alleviate suffering and always encouraging us to do the same. But he knows we'll never end it all. And when he is himself visited by horrific rejection and pain and suffering, he never curses suffering itself. He found some way to remain true and loving, as we know, even to his very death. So how about us? When suffering visits us, well, of course we grieve. We have to. But how do we then let our grief, our pain, maybe even not let us become embittered, but even deepen the best in us? Because it can. I'll offer 3 suggestions. There are plenty. 3 of the things that help us when we're visited by suffering or as we go through life to not let it make us become bitter, but to perhaps even open us up to a greater care are 1. First, to remind ourselves that no one escapes suffering, so we're not so surprised by it. It visits us all. I remember I was either ending graduate school or a baby priest, and I read the wonderful book by M. Scott Peck called The Road Less Traveled. The first sentence was 3 words long, and when I read the first sentence, I breathed in somewhat of relief. It was, life is difficult. I don't think I had ever heard anyone say that out loud, and I was glad that someone said that. On some level, it made me feel less like, what's wrong with me? That life seemed difficult sometimes. Suffering visits us all, and it's good to remind ourselves, or as Evelyn Underhill put it, a spiritual writer born in the 19th century, there is a night shift, and sooner or later we're all put on it. 1, we remind ourselves that suffering visits us all. 2, we remind ourselves that no matter what life throws at us, it does not take away our ability to be people of goodness and integrity and to love. Aside. Notice I said what life throws at us, not what God throws at us. I abhor the cliches that suggest God causes suffering. God never gives you more than you can handle. Everything happens for a reason. God never closes the door without opening a window. God does not cause suffering. When suffering visits us, God is there weeping with us, bringing life, but God does not cause it. Okay. Back to when life throws suffering at us, we have the capacity in us to love that is in no way diminished. No suffering diminishes our dignity and our goodness, and no one or no thing can take away our power to love. As a matter of fact, it is often in our suffering that that very capacity grows. And there's a gift that can emerge from pain, not that anyone wants pain, but there's a depth of wisdom and compassion that we can only learn sometimes through what we suffer. Now, happiness is not freedom from suffering. It is in part learning to find meaning in the midst of all of life, including that which is hard. So, the second truth is, we're more than our pain, we're more than our wound, and we can always choose, no matter what, to be people of integrity, people who care. And 3, we remember that we're not alone. You know, one of the reasons Catholic institutions have crucifixes in them is the reminder that we have a God who is not aloof from our pain, but has entered into every single thing we suffer, weeping with us, not causing it, but being with us. And also, that is in a very real way one of the key reasons we have a church family, because we're in it together. Yeah. This is not a place for those who always have life by the tail, right? This is a place for people who are broken, wounded, beaten up a little bit, sometimes who fall flat, just trying to be together, and we have each other along the way. I don't think I ever have said a Sunday Mass without seeing at least some people crying at some point or another. This is a place where the pain belongs. That's number 3. I don't like how glib it sounds, but it's true. No one escapes it. It does not take away our capacity for love and can even deepen it in us. And 3, we're not alone. So, I'll end with something a buddy of mine told me years ago about the Special Olympics, because I think it's an image for us. He was working a race with young men with Down syndrome. And during the race, one of the runners fell, cut his knee, and started crying. The lead runner stopped when he heard his buddy cry, went back, went over to him and said, "It's okay," helped him up, and they started walking together. They locked arms. Pretty much the other runners all stopped about then too, and in the end, they all ended up locking arms and walking together. And he said this is one of the favorite things he ever saw. He said, everyone was standing and cheering in a way he had never heard as that group of runners walked arm in arm across the finish line together. They were all winners. So it is with us. Life is hard. We get beaten up along the way. Sometimes we're burning on the bottom of the pan, and other times the sufferings are horrific. But we don't go it alone. Together we walk arm in arm toward the finish line, perhaps a little bit beaten up along the way, but together, beloved children of God, in our deepest dignity.